There are things history didn't just forget. There are things history buried on purpose, poured dirt over, pressed down with the weight of silence and time and the deliberate decision made by powerful men who knew that if people ever truly understood what had been done, there would be no peace. Not for them, not for their legacies, not for the systems they built. This is one of those stories. A pregnant woman, forced to lie face down over a hole cut into the earth. Her stomach suspended above the hollow ground below. Her back exposed, her body held in place by hands that treated her like property because to them, that is exactly what she was. And then the whip came down. Not once, not twice. Again and again with the calm and methodical rhythm of someone who had done this before, someone who would do it again. This was not an isolated act of cruelty carried out by one broken man in a moment of rage. This was a system. Calculated, documented, repeated across plantations and decades in ways that the history books that ended up in classrooms were never meant to describe in full. The pit was dug specifically so the unborn child would not be harmed, not out of compassion but because the child too was property, worth money, worth labor, worth preserving even as its mother was being destroyed. What happened after that? What that woman chose to do, who she became, what she was willing to risk. That is what this story is about. Because she did not break. And they were not prepared for what she did next. Welcome to Echoes of Silent Souls, where history that was buried gets pulled back into the light. Before we go any further, drop your location in the comments below. Your city, your country. Because people from every corner of this world are watching, and that matters. If you believe these stories deserve to be heard, hit like and subscribe. Every view, every share keeps this history alive. Now, let's begin. Her name, her real name, had been taken from her so long ago that she had learned not to reach for it in public. The name her mother had given her, the name spoken in a particular tone that held warmth and belonging and the specific texture of home, that name lived somewhere deep inside her, protected, tucked beneath the surface of every interaction she was forced to have with the world that owned her. What they called her now was easier for them. Shorter. A name that fit in a single breath, something that could be shouted across a field without effort. She answered to it because answering was survival. But she never let it replace what she knew herself to truly be. She was 24 years old. Young by some measures, ancient by others, because there is a particular kind of aging that comes not from years but from what those years contain. What they demand from your body, from your mind, from the part of you that still insists on remaining human despite a world that keeps insisting otherwise. The plantation sat in South Carolina, pressed into the landscape like something the land hadn't chosen but had no way to remove. It stretched in every direction, fields of cotton, paths worn smooth by the feet of people who never walked them freely, structures that served function without offering comfort. The house at the center of it all loomed over everything, white columns and wide porches belonging to a man whose comfort depended entirely on the discomfort of everyone he owned. Amara had been there long enough to understand the rhythms of the place. Long enough to know which silences were safe and which ones were the quiet before something terrible. Long enough to have learned how to survive, not by fighting openly but by seeing everything, absorbing everything, and tucking away the knowledge of how this world worked until that knowledge could be useful. She had also learned, in the way that all enslaved women eventually learned, that her body was not her own. It could be claimed, used, directed in ways she had no power to refuse. The child she now carried was the living consequence of that reality. A life that had been placed inside her without her consent, growing now in the darkness of her body, innocent of everything, dependent on everything. She did not let herself hate it. The child was not the sin. The sin belonged to someone else entirely. What she felt when she pressed her palm against the curve of her stomach, quietly when no one was watching, was something complicated and tender. A fierceness that surprised her. A determination that had no clear shape yet but was hardening with each passing week, each passing month, each moment that reminded her what kind of world this child would be born into if she did nothing. She had watched other women go through this. Watched them give birth and then watched their children be catalogued, assessed, assigned a value. Had watched the particular cruelty of a mother holding a newborn and understanding, somewhere in the deepest part of herself, that this child was not truly hers to keep. That the same hands that would measure out a field would one day measure out that child's future too. Amara had made no spoken decision yet, but something in her had already begun to close like a fist. The morning it happened started the way every other morning started. Pre-dawn darkness. The sounds of the plantation stirring back to life. Bodies pulling themselves upright out of sleep that was never long enough and never deep enough, preparing for another day that would ask everything from them and give nothing back. Amara moved carefully as she always did. Her pregnancy was visible now, obvious to anyone who looked, and visibility brought its own complications. There were women who had been assigned lighter work as their time drew close, not out of concern for them, but because a woman injured or exhausted to the point of collapse during labor was an expensive problem. The calculation was always economic, never human. But lighter work was not the same as less scrutiny. If anything, it meant more watching. More monitoring of what her body was doing, how it was progressing, whether the investment it represented was being protected. She knew all of this. She accepted it the same way she accepted the heat, the ache in her lower back, the constant low-level vigilance required just to move through a single day without incident. The overseer that day was a man named Tate. She had learned to read him the way you learn to read weather, not because you can change it, but because knowing what is coming gives you the small mercy of preparation. Tate moved differently on certain days. Tighter in the jaw, quicker in his glances. Something wound up just beneath the surface of him, looking for a place to release. Today he moved like that. She noticed it early and felt the familiar tightening in her chest that was not quite fear but was not far from it either. She told herself to stay careful. Stay quiet. Stay invisible in the ways that mattered. It wasn't enough. It was never enough, not when a man like Tate was looking for something to make an example of. The accusation, when it came, was not directed at her specifically. It was directed at a group, a vague allegation of work done poorly, of insubordination, of something that needed correcting. The specifics did not matter to Tate. The specifics never mattered to men like Tate. What mattered was the act of correction itself, the demonstration. The message sent through one person's suffering to everyone watching. He chose Amara. She heard her name and something in her body went very still. Not frozen, not paralyzed, but present in a way that was sharp and clear and terrible. Her mind registered everything at once. The faces of the women around her, some looking down, some looking at her with an expression she recognized. The understanding that passed between them wordlessly. The kind that says, "I know what is coming and I cannot stop it and I am so sorry." She stepped forward. Because stepping forward, even toward something horrible, was still a choice. The only one left to her in that moment. The order was given. Dig the pit. 2 men were handed shovels. They worked efficiently without looking at her. The ground resisted at first, packed earth, dense from years of foot traffic, roots threading through the soil as if the earth itself was trying to hold together. But it gave way eventually. It always did. The shape of it emerged slowly. A hole not wide enough to be a grave, not deep enough to disappear into, but exactly the right size to swallow something. To suspend something. To position a body in the specific configuration that this punishment required. Amara understood it before they explained it. She had heard of this. Women whispered about it in the half-dark of sleeping quarters, voices low, tone careful. The kind of story you passed along not to frighten but to prepare. Because knowing was the only armor available to people whose lives stripped them of everything else. The pit was designed with a terrible logic. The punishment could continue without destroying what was inside her. The pregnancy was preserved not because she mattered but because what she carried mattered. The child was property. The mother was property. The property must be maintained. Therefore, the pit. She stood at the edge of it and looked down into that hollow space and felt the full weight of what this place was. What this system was. What it did to human beings while calling itself civilized. While writing laws. While building churches. While insisting, always insisting, that there was an order to things and that the order was right and good and ordained. She did not scream. She did not plead. She had learned long ago that neither of those things changed what was going to happen. They only changed how much of yourself you handed over in the process. She let herself be positioned. Her body stretched across the opening. her stomach suspended above the empty space below, the child protected by hollow air while the rest of her was offered up without protection. Her arms were pulled forward, her legs held, and the position itself was a kind of statement about what she was considered to be. An object to be arranged. A problem to be solved. A body without a self attached to it. And then Tate raised the whip. The first strike hit her like a sentence. Final. Declarative. A sound that split the air and then landed, and the pain was not the sharp thing she had braced for, it was bigger than that, deeper, a shock that moved through her entire body and then settled in and stayed. The second came before the first had finished announcing itself. The third. Amara pressed her fingers into the earth in front of her. Gripped the soil the way a person grips the edge of something when they are trying not to fall. She breathed. Controlled, deliberate, the only thing within her power. Because the breathing was hers. They could not take that. She chose every inhale, every exhale, and that small decision, to breathe with purpose rather than in panic, was an act of will that she held onto with everything she had. Tate moved with no urgency. No heat. There was no rage in him, and somehow that was the most unbearable part of it. Rage could be waited out. Rage peaks and exhausts itself. What Tate had was colder than rage. He performed this the way he performed any task. With the detached efficiency of a man who had no reason to feel anything because no one had ever required it of him. Each strike measured. Each pause calculated. Not mercy, assessment. A craftsman checking his work. Around her the plantation did not stop. That too was part of the cruelty, the ordinary world continuing its ordinary rhythms while this happened inside it. Distant sounds. Birds. The creak of machinery. The particular silence of people who are present but have been taught that looking away is how you survive. The women who watched her, and some of them watched because looking away entirely felt like abandonment, carried their watching differently from one another. Some had eyes that were flat and distant, the expression of people who have seen this too many times and have built a wall around the part of themselves that responds to it, because that part needs protecting. Some had eyes that were wet and burning. All of them understood that there was nothing they could do. That understanding was its own kind of suffering. Amara's body began to separate from itself. Not fully. Not into darkness. But a part of her pulled back from the immediate sensation the way a flame retreats from rain. Not extinguished, just changed. She had heard women describe this. The way pain past a certain threshold becomes something different. Not less real but less consuming. Like the body reaches the end of what it can process and begins rationing its own response. She used that space. In the narrow room that opened up inside her while her body bore what was being done to it, she thought about the child. She thought about the movement she had felt that morning, the small turning beneath her skin, the quiet insistence of a life not yet born asserting its existence. She thought about what it would mean to survive this. Not just as continuation, not just more of the same days in the same place leading to the same inevitable destinations, but survival with a direction. Survival as the first step toward something. She held on to that thought the way she held on to the earth. Tate stepped back. The whip was lowered. The air changed, thinned, somehow the tension in it releasing slightly. Not gone. Changed. She remained where she was for a moment, her body not yet understanding that it was over. Her fingers still in the soil. Her breathing still controlled but ragged at the edges. And then hands came, not violent this time, and lifted her, pulled her back from the edge of the pit, returned her weight to solid ground. She stood. Barely. Her legs remembered their purpose only at the last possible moment. But she stood. They led her to a shaded space and left her there. Not attended to, not cared for in any human sense. Left there the way you leave a tool after using it, somewhere out of the way until it is needed again. The shade was thin. The ground was hard. But the direct heat of the sun was gone, and that was something. For a long time she simply breathed. Felt the pain change its character as the immediate shock faded and what was underneath became clear. A deep, persistent soreness that spread across her back and shoulders and down through her arms. The kind that would stay. She knew this. She had known other women who carried the marks for years. She would carry them too. She let her hand move to her stomach. Slowly. Carefully. The gesture was so familiar by now that it was nearly involuntary. The press of her palm against the curve of the child, the listening in her fingers for whatever signal might come back. It came. A small movement. A shift. A presence announcing itself in the only way it could. She closed her eyes and let that be the only thing in the world for a moment. The sound of the plantation, the ache of her body, the heat and the fear and the memory of what had just happened, all of it receded. And there was just that. Just the child. Just the tiny persistent fact of a life continuing inside her despite everything. When she opened her eyes, something had changed. Not in her circumstances. The plantation was still there. Tate was still somewhere on it. The same chains of authority and ownership and violence that had always structured her days were exactly as they had been. Nothing external had changed by even the smallest degree. But inside her, in the place where she held her sense of what was possible and what was not, something had moved. The pivot of it was small, but it was permanent. She could feel it the way you feel a bone reset after it has been broken. The rightness of the new position and the irreversibility of it. She was not going to stay. She had thought this before in the vague, protected way you think about things that are too dangerous to fully imagine, the way you let a thought exist at the very edge of your mind without letting it come all the way in. She had let herself think the word escape in the same way you might let yourself look at a door you believe is locked. Not really looking. Just knowing it is there. But now the door was different. Now she had looked through it. Now she knew, with the particular certainty that comes from pain that could have broken you but didn't, that the cost of staying was higher than the cost of going. That the life this child would be born into if she did nothing was not a life she could accept. That the moment in the pit, the position she had been forced into, the casual efficiency of what Tate had done, all of it was not a warning. It was a preview. A preview of what came next and next and next until there was nothing left to harm. She pressed her fingers into the soil beside her and looked at the line of trees at the far edge of the fields. They had always been there. She had always known they were there. But today they looked different. Today they looked like a beginning. Days passed. The plantation continued its rhythm. Amara continued hers, or appeared to. From the outside she looked the same. Moved with the same careful quietness. Kept her gaze where it was expected. Answered to her name. Did what was required of her. But underneath that surface, something entirely different was happening. She was watching differently now. Not the defensive watching she had always done, the constant peripheral monitoring for threat, for danger, for the signals that told you something bad was building before it arrived. This was a different kind of looking. Purposeful. Architectural. She was studying the plantation the way you study a problem you intend to solve. Which paths were watched during which hours. When the overseer's attention fractured, the moments when two things demanded their focus simultaneously, when habit made them predictable, when exhaustion made them loose. Which workers moved between tasks with a freedom that might create gaps. Where the trees began and which direction they deepened. She gathered this information quietly, piece by piece, the way you gather tinder. Each small detail was useless alone. But together, arranged correctly, it could become something that burned. She was careful about how she gathered it. Careful about who saw her gathering. Because in this place, being seen thinking too clearly was its own kind of danger. The appearance of resignation was armor. The appearance of defeated acceptance was the most powerful disguise available. She wore it with precision. It was during one of these evenings, when the work of the day had ended and the particular gray light of dusk settled over the fields, that she became aware of someone watching her. Not watching in the way of surveillance. Not Tate, not the overseers, not the layered system of monitoring that was always present. This was different. A quieter attention. Coming from someone who understood the difference between watching and seeing. She turned slowly, not quickly, because quick movements attracted attention and she had learned to make herself fluid and unhurried in every interaction. An older woman stood several feet away. Her name on the plantation was Nella. She had been here longer than most, long enough that her presence had become part of the landscape, unnoticed the way fixtures go unnoticed, unremarkable to people who had stopped looking closely. Which was, Amara now understood, exactly what Nella had intended. Nella was not a large woman. She was compact and still, with the kind of stillness that was not passivity but concentrated intention. Her face was lined and her hands were roughened, and her eyes held a depth that Amara recognized immediately because she had felt something similar growing in herself. The eyes of someone who had survived a great deal by understanding a great deal. They looked at each other for a moment without speaking. In that moment there was an assessment happening from both directions, the kind of rapid, wordless reckoning that people in dangerous circumstances become capable of. Reading another person not by what they say but by everything beneath what they say. Then Nella spoke. Her voice was barely above breath. The volume of someone who had learned that the mouth is the most dangerous organ a person in her position has. Used too loudly, too freely, it would bring everything down. "You're not looking at the trees because you like the view," she said. The words settled over Amara like a hand pressed over a flame, not extinguishing it, just containing it, keeping it from being seen from a distance. For a moment she did not respond. She felt the familiar tightening, the self-protective instinct of someone trained by experience to treat any unexpected attention as potential threat. Even another enslaved woman. Even someone who looked at her with what appeared to be understanding. Because she had learned that what appeared to be trust could become its opposite in an instant, could be used against you by people who had their own survival to consider. But Nella waited without pressure. She did not move closer. Did not push. She simply waited in the way of someone who already knew the answer and was giving Amara time to arrive at her own knowing of it. "I've been watching you," Nella said after the silence had stretched long enough. "The change in you after the pit. I know that look. I've seen it before. In women who decided. And in women who tried." She paused. "The difference between those two groups is what you do in the time between the decision and the attempt." Amara exhaled slowly. She said nothing yet. But she did not walk away. They met in small moments after that. Never obviously. Never in ways that would create pattern or invite scrutiny. A few words while drawing water. A brief overlap near the edge of the fields when no one was positioned to notice. Brief enough to be nothing. Charged enough to be everything. What Nella knew was considerable. She knew the names of stars and how to use them for direction. She knew how water moved, which direction it tended to run, how to follow a stream without losing yourself, how water confused the scent trails that tracking dogs relied on. She knew which plants in the forest were edible and which were dangerous. She knew the rough shape of the territory surrounding them, not in precise cartographic detail but in the functional way of someone who had spent years quietly accumulating every piece of information that might one day be necessary for a journey she intended to survive. She also knew the failures. She told those stories without flinching, because she understood that they were the most important ones. She named what had gone wrong: too little preparation, too much haste, trust placed incorrectly, movement at the wrong hour, paths that looked clear but were watched in ways the traveler hadn't known about. She told these stories not to discourage but to arm. Because the people who had often failed at the same predictable points, and if you knew the points you could move around them. "The first night," Nella said one evening, her voice like smoke, present and thin and difficult to catch, "is not about distance. It's about confusion. You're not running. You're making the trail impossible. You're making them waste time on misdirection. Distance comes after you've taken away their certainty of which way you went." Amara held every word. She stored these instructions the way she stored everything important. Not written down, which was dangerous, but pressed into memory with deliberate force, repeated internally, rehearsed in the quiet of her mind during the hours when her body was performing the expected work of the day. She learned the stars. Particularly the one that didn't move, the fixed point that told you which direction was north regardless of the season, the hour, the cloud cover. She practiced finding it in the evening sky without obviously looking up, without pointing, without drawing attention. She learned to read the bark of trees, which side moss grew on, how shadow fell at different times of day. Small things. Things that couldn't help you alone but that together formed a navigational language available to anyone willing to learn it. She learned patience in a new way. Not the passive patience of someone who has no choice. The active patience of someone counting down. Her body continued to change. The child grew. The window through which she could move with the speed and stamina that escape required was narrowing. Both she and Nella understood this. It created a pressure between them, not urgency exactly, which leads to mistakes, but a heightened attention to timing, to recognizing the right moment when it came. The practical work of preparing to escape while enslaved is one of the most quietly extraordinary things a human being can do. Because you cannot acquire supplies obviously. You cannot move differently. You cannot shift your behavior in any way that would register as change to eyes trained to monitor you constantly. Every single preparation must be invisible. Amara began to save small pieces of food. Not in quantities that would be noticed. A few crumbs here, a small piece of dried something there, tucked into a fold of cloth, kept against her body where it wouldn't be seen. Over days, these accumulations amounted to almost nothing. Over weeks, they amounted to survival for a few extra hours on a road where food sources were uncertain. She identified what she could carry. Not much. The most important thing was what she could carry in her mind. The directions, the instructions, the specific details that Nella had given her. But certain physical objects mattered. Something to drink from near a water source. Something to wrap around her shoulders in the cold of the deeper night hours. Nothing that would be noticed missing. Nothing that couldn't be explained by coincidence if found before she left. She studied the gap. Every system has gaps. Every set of routines has blind spots. Moments where the attention required to maintain the system falters, where habit creates predictability, where too much is happening for any one person to watch everything. Amara looked for these the way a navigator looks for a passage. With patience, with systematic attention, without expecting to find it quickly or easily. It was there. It existed. She knew it would. It was in the overlap between two tasks in the late afternoon. A window of perhaps 30 minutes when the overseer's attention was divided by competing demands and when her own expected position was ambiguous enough that an absence would not immediately register as significant. Not long. Barely enough. Barely was enough. She also thought about aftermath. About what happened when she was discovered missing. The pattern was predictable. She had learned it from Nella's accounts of those who had tried before. An initial confusion. Then a search of the immediate area. Then the dogs. Then an expanding search that moved outward from the plantation in the most likely directions. The most likely directions were also the most direct ones. The fastest paths, the clearest routes. Which meant the less direct, less clear routes were the safer ones, even if they were slower. Nella had told her, "They will expect you to run." Run means speed, means roads and rivers and the most direct path north. Be slow first. Be confusing first. Let them look where runners go. Don't be a runner. Not yet. Amara absorbed this. She held it. She would not be a runner. Not yet. She would be something harder to find. Someone who moved with purpose through terrain that was not built for observation. Someone who used the darkness not to disappear but to make the trail impossible. Someone who had spent weeks learning a forest she had never been inside before she stepped foot in it. And then one afternoon the gap appeared. She felt it before she saw it. The particular loosening of the day, the way the afternoon had fractured into competing demands. Two overseers distracted by a dispute at the far end of the east field. Movement and noise drawing attention in that direction. The predictable human instinct to look at the thing that was loudest. No one was looking at her. Amara did not hurry. Hurrying was its own advertisement. She moved the way she always moved, steady, unhurried, purposeful in a way that suggested she was simply going where she was supposed to go. She had been practicing this movement in her imagination for weeks. The way her feet would feel on the ground. The pace that looked like task completion rather than escape. The angle that kept the tree lean in her path without pointing directly toward it. She crossed the field. She felt the distance between herself and the overseer's last known position changing. Not checking, not looking back, because looking back was the movement of someone afraid of being followed, and she could not afford to be that person yet. She felt the geometry of it in her body. The calculus of exposure decreasing with each step. The trees were ahead of her now. She had looked at this line of trees her entire time on this plantation without ever knowing their interior. From outside they were simply where the plantation ended. A border. A boundary. Not a place, just the edge of a world. She stepped across the edge. And the forest swallowed her. The change was immediate and total. Sound changed. The sounds of the plantation receded and the sounds of the living world took their place, dense and complex, full of information she had prepared herself to read. Light changed, filtered now through canopy, dappled, inconsistent, creating a new visual landscape that would require adjustment. The ground changed beneath her feet, root-threaded, uneven, textured in ways that demanded attention. She was inside it now. She allowed herself 10 seconds of absolute stillness. Just listening. Just checking. Just confirming that no sounds from behind her had changed in the way that would mean she had been seen. Nothing. She began to move. The first phase was not distance. Nella's voice was with her on this, clear and insistent. Confuse the trail. Make it complicated. She moved at angles rather than straight lines. She doubled back once, briefly, using a rocky stretch of ground where her footprints would not press. She found the first small stream not long after, barely a thread of water but real, and walked its edge in the way she had been taught, not fully in it but close enough that the water complicated the scent trail. Then she turned north. The star, when darkness came, was where it was supposed to be. Fixed. Reliable. She looked at it without sentimentality. It was a tool, and she used it like one, orienting herself by it and then keeping that orientation as the forest moved and turned around her. She walked through the night. Night in a forest is not the darkness of an enclosed space. It is not still. It is not empty. It is a full, moving, living darkness that shifts constantly around you. Branches, the rustle of animals and undergrowth, the distant calls of things that cannot see you but that your body responds to with old and animal fear anyway. Amara moved through it with the focus she had cultivated over weeks of mental preparation. When fear rose in her, and it rose, it was real. She did not pretend it wasn't. She named it quietly and let it exist beside her rather than consuming her. Fear was information. Fear was the body's honest response to real danger. It was not her enemy. Panic was her enemy. She kept the line between them clear. Her back ached. The wounds from the pit were not fully healed and the exertion of movement pulled at them in ways that made every stride cost something extra. She did not stop for this. She allocated it, accepted the cost, measured it against what was behind her, and kept walking. The child moved occasionally. She took each small movement as confirmation, still here, still enduring, still surviving alongside her. She thought sometimes of Nella back at the plantation. The older woman who had poured her accumulated knowledge into another person without asking for anything in return, without even the possibility of receiving anything in return. Nella had attempted this herself once years earlier, had been caught before she reached the trees, had been brought back and had survived the consequences and had remained outwardly the same unnoticed fixture she had always been. But she had kept the knowledge, had kept it safe and intact and waiting for someone who might be able to use it. There is a kind of courage in that which does not get named in the histories. The courage of the person who could not go but made sure someone else could. Amara carried Nella's knowledge as carefully as she carried her own body. It was weight she was grateful for. The hours passed. And then, distant, cutting through the night forest with horrible clarity, she heard them. Dogs. Her body reacted before her mind could fully process the sound. Every muscle locked. Every sense sharpened. The particular quality of that sound, the baying, purposeful and relentless, the sound of animals trained to this specific work, reached something old and primal in her and told her, they know. They had discovered her absence. She gauged the distance. Far still. Not close. But dogs moved fast and distance was temporary advantage. She found the stream. She had been watching for it, another thin thread of water, this one slightly larger, cutting through the forest floor. She entered it at the edge, the cold of it hitting her feet and ankles with a shock that was clarifying. She moved along it for longer than comfort allowed, longer than her body wanted to. Because every minute in the water was a minute the trail became harder to read. When she left the stream, she moved in a direction that did not match the direction she had been heading before she entered it. One of Nella's most specific instructions. Change your angle after the water. Not dramatically, subtly. Enough to create doubt. Enough to buy time. She did not know if it worked. She could not know out here in the dark. She could only do what she had been taught and trust the teacher. The dogs grew no louder. That was not the same as growing quieter. But it was not worse. She walked. Dawn did not arrive like a reward. It arrived like a complication, gradual and inevitable, stripping away the protective darkness she had relied on and replacing it with a visibility she now had to account for. In darkness she had been invisible. In light she was a figure moving through a forest, and while the trees still provided cover, every moment of open ground was now a moment of exposure. She slowed slightly, moved with even more deliberation, used the density of the undergrowth rather than the faster, easier paths between the trees. Her strength was less than it had been at the start of the night. She acknowledged this with the same clear accounting she had applied to everything else. It was fact, not defeat. She had known this would happen. The question was not how to prevent exhaustion but how to manage it, how to keep going at a sustainable pace rather than burning everything at once and collapsing. She ate a small amount from what she had saved. Barely enough to call it eating. But something. The act of it was almost ceremonial, the acknowledgement that her body was a thing worth feeding, a thing that deserved to continue. The forest was changing around her. Thinning. The trees less dense, the underbrush different in character, the ground more varied. These were changes she had not prepared for specifically but that she read as change of terrain. The landscape doing what landscapes do, shifting from one character to another without announcing the transition. Through the thinning trees she saw it. A clearing. Small. Rough-edged where the forest gave it up reluctantly. And beyond the clearing, a structure. Low, simple, built from materials that showed their age. Not a plantation building. Nothing here suggested the particular architecture of ownership, the deliberate scale of something built to impress, to intimidate, to announce power. This was modest to the point of invisibility. The kind of place built to serve function and nothing else. She stopped at the tree line. Her body was exhausted. Every part of her wanted to move toward the structure the same way parched soil wants water. Immediately, without evaluation. But she held herself still and she looked and she listened and she waited. Nothing moved around it that suggested threat. No voices. No patrol. No animals trained for pursuit. The place had a particular quiet that she had learned to read, not the silence of a place being deliberately kept silent, but the genuine stillness of a space that had nothing to hide and nothing threatening to conceal. Still she waited. Minutes passed. And then the door opened. The woman who came through the door was older than Amara. Her face was deeply lined in the way of someone who had lived most of their years outdoors. Her hands were visible from a distance, the hands of someone who had worked for everything she had. She moved without haste and without the specific kind of wariness that Amara would have recognized as danger. She looked at Amara across the clearing. She did not look surprised. That was the thing that struck Amara most forcefully in that moment. Not fear, not alarm, not the complicated social calculation of someone weighing obligation against risk against everything else that governed these decisions in this time and this place. What the woman's face held instead was something closer to recognition. As if she had been expecting someone. Maybe not Amara specifically. But someone like Amara, in Amara's condition, arriving at this hour from that direction. The woman took a small step forward. Not commanding. Offering. Amara stood at the tree line and measured the distance between them, not literally but in every other way that mattered. She measured trust, which was not a feeling but a calculation, assembled from evidence, from what she had observed in those few minutes of watching. She measured risk, the risk of stepping out of the trees versus the risk of remaining in the forest with no shelter and diminishing strength. She measured possibility. She stepped out of the trees. Each step across the open ground of the clearing felt enormous. The specific enormity of a decision made visible, of something internal becoming external, of the moment before a thing and the moment after being separated by nothing more than a foot placed on unfamiliar soil. The woman did not move toward her aggressively. Did not rush. She remained where she was and let Amara come to her at whatever pace Amara chose, and that restraint was itself a kind of communication, the message of it clear. This is your choice to make. When they were close enough to speak at the volume of ordinary conversation, the woman looked at her steadily, taking in Amara's condition, the weariness and the pregnancy and the evidence of what had been done to her back, visible even from the front in the way she held herself. You can come inside, she said. Not, who are you? Not, what do you want? Not, this is dangerous for me and I need to know what I'm agreeing to before I agree to it. Just, you can come inside. Amara's voice, when she found it, was barely there, roughened by the night and the effort of everything. How far have I come? She managed. The woman considered this. Far enough, she said. But not far enough yet. Come inside first. Then we'll talk about what comes next. And Amara crossed the threshold. The interior of the space was small and spare. A single room serving multiple purposes, the way rooms in modest buildings of that era often did. There was a table and 2 chairs and a low sleeping platform and a fireplace that held warm coals and the particular smell of a space that had been inhabited carefully, long-term, by someone who had made the most of what was available. Amara sat in one of the chairs because her legs would not support the performance of being fine any longer. The chair held her and she let it. She pressed her hands flat against the table in front of her, solid, real here, and spent a moment simply acknowledging that she was inside a room that was not the plantation. She was inside a room that was not the plantation. The understanding of that arrived in waves. Not all at once, not as a single surge of emotion. She had not come all this way by allowing her emotions to move faster than her thinking, and that discipline did not simply switch off. It came slowly, in increments, each wave arriving a little more fully than the one before. She was not there. The woman, whose name she would learn was Ruth, moved around the small space with the efficiency of someone long practiced in doing more than she appeared to be doing. Water was heated. A cloth was made available. Food, real food, not the carefully hoarded fragments Amara had carried, appeared without announcement or fanfare, placed on the table as simply as if this were routine hospitality. Which, Amara came to understand, it was. Ruth had done this before. Had prepared for someone in need arriving at her door the way some people prepare for weather, with practical readiness, with the understanding that the eventuality was a question of when and not whether. Ruth was not alone in what she did. Amara would learn this in the hours ahead. There was a network. The word for it would come later, the name it would eventually be given was not yet widely used, but the structure existed. A loose and dangerous and improbably persistent chain of people who provided shelter, food, information and guidance to those who were escaping. People who risked everything. People who did it anyway. Amara was not the first person to walk out of that forest into that clearing. She would not be the last. 7 weeks later, in a different place, further north, more shelter, deeper in the network, Amara's child was born. The birth was not easy. No birth is entirely easy, but this one carried extra weight. The accumulated toll of months lived under conditions that were hostile to human health in the most literal sense. The body that delivered this child was a body that had been denied adequate food and rest, that had been physically assaulted, that had made a nighttime journey through forest terrain while pregnant and healing simultaneously. But the child arrived. A daughter. She came into the world in a room where no one would calculate her value in dollars. She came into the world to a woman who reached for her with hands that had carried something through darkness in order to make this moment possible. She came into a space that was not free. Nowhere in that country in that era was truly free for people who looked like them, but that was not the plantation. That was not the pit. That mattered. Perhaps more than words could adequately express. The distance between those two things, between the world the child had been carried through and the world she arrived in, was measurable not in miles but in something else entirely. Amara held her and felt the full weight of everything it had cost. The pain that had been done to her at the pit. The night of walking through fear and darkness. The weeks of preparation. The information absorbed from an older woman who had kept her knowledge alive against the day it might be needed. All of it had been expenditure. All of it had cost. And here was what it had purchased. A child who would not be catalogued. A child whose first breath was taken in a room where her mother's arms were waiting, not where a ledger entry was being made. A child who arrived already ahead of the calculation that had been prepared for her. Ruth had been right that first morning. Far enough, she had said, but not far enough yet. It was still true. The journey was not finished. The world beyond that room was still the world it was. But it was also different than it had been. And different was not nothing. Different was everything. Here is what the men who designed the pit could not account for. They designed it to break her body while preserving the investment inside her. They calculated for the financial logic of the thing, preserve the property, punish the person, maintain the system. This is what systems do. They optimize for their own continuation. They work precisely within the parameters they are built for. What they could not calculate was what would happen inside her while it was happening to her. They could not calculate the fist that would close around something essential, the part of her that watched a hollow space in the earth and saw, for the first time, not the evidence of her captivity but the shape of the choice that lay ahead of her. They could not calculate Nella, the older woman who had moved through their system for years, unnoticed, accumulating knowledge like water accumulates behind a dam, waiting for the moment the dam could be used. They could not calculate the knowledge networks that moved through the enslaved community in the spaces they never watched, carried in whispers and memory, and the quiet determination of people who had decided that the system would not have the last word. They could not calculate the stars, fixed and indifferent, available to anyone willing to learn them. They could not calculate Ruth and the chain she was part of, the dangerous, decentralized, tenacious network of people who had decided that their own safety was a worthwhile thing to risk in service of someone else's freedom. They could not calculate the child. A life that arrived in a room where the only thing being measured was love. A child who would grow up knowing that her mother had crossed a tree line and walked through darkness carrying her towards something better, and who therefore carried in her own blood the knowledge that better was possible, that it required courage rather than luck, that it was made and not given. History tried to bury this story the same way it tried to bury all the others, by not writing it down, by not naming the names, by letting the silence between documents function as erasure. The records that survive from plantations in this era are records of ownership, of transaction, of the system observing itself and finding itself orderly. They do not record what was felt. They do not record what was decided in the quiet of a mind moving behind a face trained to show nothing. They do not record the things whispered between women near a water source in the brief gap between one task and the next. Those things were passed differently, through people rather than paper, through stories told carefully, in safe spaces, to people who understood what they were receiving and why it needed to be preserved. This is one of those stories. This is what we choose to remember. If this story moved you, if it did something to the inside of your chest that doesn't have a clean name, sit with that for a moment before you scroll past. Because what you just heard is not fiction. The cruelty of the pit was real. It was documented. It was practiced across plantations and decades by men who wrote letters home about the weather and attended church on Sundays. The women who endured it were real. Their choices in the aftermath, to survive, to prepare, to walk into the dark of a forest with nothing but knowledge and will and an unborn child, those choices were real. The Nellas were real. The Ruths were real. The networks were real. And the children who were born on the other side of those journeys were real, and their children and their children's children, down to people who are alive right now, carrying something in their blood that was purchased at extraordinary cost by someone who refused, in the darkest possible circumstances, to accept that this was all there was. That is worth knowing. That is worth holding. That is worth passing along. If you believe these stories deserve to stay in the light, like this video and subscribe to Echoes of Silent Souls. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your city. Your country. Because this history does not belong to one place. It belongs to all of us, and it connects us across time and across every border that was ever drawn to separate people from each other. We choose not to forget. Until next time.